Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Liam's Hockey here on Monday night, April the 13th. Thanks very much if you're checking any of these out periodically, regularly, or one-off. If this is your first time, welcome. And we're just having some fun here as we take it day by day during this crazy time of this global pandemic, and I hope everybody is staying safe. A little bit of a variance tonight. We will, of course, have our usual couple of events on this day in hockey history, but I'm a regular follower on social media. I like to jump on Twitter every now and then, and that was an interesting question today. They put these lists together all the time, name the top 5 Canadian athletes of all time. I threw my list down, and of course a couple guys, one in particular had to he just lost his mind. I just didn't have the interest or the time to go back and forth with some 2-bit piece of crap moron idiot who just wanted simply to take umbrage with my point, who I named. Make your own list. Make your own list, buddy. Like, if you disagree with me, who cares? There's no right or wrong answer. Make your own list. Anyway, we'll have some fun with that in a couple minutes' time, and I'll make my list and try and explain why I did it for those that follow along for the proverbial shits and giggles, as they say. On this day, April the 13th in 1927, the Ottawa Senators won their last Stanley Cup. They beat the Boston Bruins. Now, a couple interesting things about this series. It was supposed to be a best of 3. Well, then it was a best of 3. But the first game ended in a tie. Because in those days, first of all, they played 2 overtime periods, 10 minutes each, I believe. I don't think there was even any score in the game. I think it was 0-0. But the ice was so brutal, they couldn't continue. So Frank Calder, the president of the NHL, said, we're not going to play any more than 5 games. Whoever has the most wins after 5 games, whether we get a best of 5 done or not, whoever has the most wins, it will be the Stanley Cup winner. Or if there is a tie after 5 games because of overtime ties, and if they're tied in wins, then I'm going to award the Stanley Cup to both teams. I don't think a lot of people know that story, but that's how it was going to go down in 1927. Anyway, the Senators made it a moot point. They won Game 2, tied Game 3, another game that went into overtime with no goal scored, discontinued. And then they won Game 4, the game in question on this date in 1927. So they won their 11th and final Stanley Cup. And there was not another final game played in Stanley Cup history in the city of Ottawa till Game 3 against Anaheim in 2007. 1927-2007. How about that? Crazy. And of course, the Sens were in the league for 59 years. That's going to happen. So there you have it. Other interesting thing about this series is the violence at the end of the deciding game on this date in Ottawa. The game was played in Ottawa at the old auditorium. If you're from the Ottawa area, and you may have heard of the auditorium, you don't know where it was. If you're familiar with the YMCA, I guess it's called the Taggart Building now, Taggart YMCA. They put some sponsorship money behind it. Good on them. Great people, friends of mine. That's where it is. On Catherine Street. That's where it is. That's where the auditorium was. So that's where the game was played. So the game got violent in the second period. Jimmy Herbert threw a butt end. There was some punches. Stuff was going on. Ottawa went up 3-0. Boston made it 3-1, but by then it was on. And George Boucher and Lionel Hitchman got in such a wild fight. 2 refs in those days, Billy Bell and Dr. Jerry Laflamme. Their names will become significant in just a few moments. Sadly. Nobody died, but it got crazy. Anyway, that Boucher-Hitchman fight was so nuts. First of all, Boucher was feeding them. Eddie Shore jumped in, and the 2 refs couldn't break it up. So the police, Ottawa police, actually jumped on the ice and helped break up that fight. A few minutes later, you got another one. You got Hooley Smith butt-ended. I believe it was... did he butt-end Herbert? No. I think it was Harry Oliver. I think he butt-ended Harry Oliver, and he's giving it to him. And then Eddie Shore jumps in again. So Smith and Hooley Smith and Oliver get tossed. And Shore got tossed as well. They threw him out. So they're throwing guys out of the game left, right, and center. And then there's another great beige camazel at the end of the game as Ottawa's won the Stanley Cup. and they're going to be presented the cup by the president of the NHL, Frank Calder. Yes, that is the man who the Calder Memorial Trophy is named after. He was the first ever president of the NHL. And what happened was Billy Tkachuk of the Boston Bruins went absolutely nuts. And he smoked Billy Bell like he hit him. Remember, Frank Calder's at the rink. Billy Tkachuk hits referee Billy Bell, tackles referee Jerry Laflamme. As to what level of physical contact he actually made with both of them, there's various degrees, different stories. But the case, that the fact remains, I should say, is that Frank Calder suspended Billy Tkachuk for life. This was the first and only lifetime suspension for on-ice play in NHL history. Now, it was rescinded 2 years later. Billy continued to play in the minors. He never again played in the NHL, even though Frank Calder rescinded it a couple of years later. He continued his pro career, but never got back in the NHL. He was a previous Stanley Cup winner with the Montreal Canadiens in 1924. He actually had a decent career, but he went absolutely nuts on this night in 1927. That unbelievable, eh? All those years ago. And suspended for life. Billy Tkachuk, C-O-U-T-U. Now, he's got a relative who plays at she's a member at Rideau Golf Club where I am, and Janet is her name, Janet Barker. She's married to Jerry Barker, and she is a direct relative of Billy Tkachuk. She told me the story one time, and I think that's pretty cool. There may be others in the Ottawa area, undoubtedly there is, and Billy, even though playing for Bruins, had ties to this area, so there you have it. Anyway, that's it from 1927 and the Ottawa Senators, and no Stanley Cups for them in their second reincarnation, but definitely looking pretty good if they can do okay in this upcoming draft lottery, whatever format it eventually takes. They've got some talent, not only coming in the near future, but even in the current roster and organization. They've got some good young talent as well, so not the least of which is Chabot and Tkachuk. So we'll see what the future holds for them there. But in the meantime, their 11th and final Stanley Cup won on this day in 1927. Also on this day, the Montreal Canadiens win the Stanley Cup in 1944. Toe Blake gets the winner. They beat Chicago. And the game ended. Habs are losing in that game. Stormed back to win it, and Toe Blake got the winner. Now, he's one of 7 guys to score 2 Stanley Cup winning goals. See if I can get them all. Jack Darragh with the Senators in 20 and 21. Toe Blake, 44 and 46. Jean Beliveau in 60 and 65, Henri Richard in 66 and 71, Bobby Orr in 70 and 72, Jacques Lemaire in 77 and 79, and Mike Bossy in 82 and 83. And I think that's the 7. And Toe Blake was one of them, doing it in this day in 1944. And I wanted to tell a little bit of Toe Blake. You know, Toe Blake started his NHL career with the Montreal Maroons. He went to the Canadiens. They put his name on the cup. I don't know what would happen today. He didn't play after regular season. The rules. There's no real rules. You did what you want. You want the name on, you got the name on. There were so many anomalies on names on the Stanley Cup. You wouldn't even believe it. I could do 10 shows just on the anomalies on names on the cup. Regardless, Toe Blake got his name with the Montreal Maroons in 1935. They traded him to the Habs. He played for the Habs for 13 years, and he coached the Montreal Canadiens for 13 years, and he retired from the Montreal Canadiens on May 13th, 1968. Yeah, a little bit of a fun on numbers there with the number 13. But the other thing I wanted to say about Toe Blake is he's obviously in the Hockey Hall of Fame and a legendary coach and set some records that's since been broken. Scotty Bowman, Al Arbour, what have you. Dick Irvin Sr., who preceded him as coach of the Montreal Canadiens, set some pretty lofty numbers as well. And we just talked about that last night, talking about Dick Sr. But in Toe's case, he opened up a tavern in Montreal that was open for a number of years. And I wrote this and talked about it recently, and I just wanted to mention it again, that I was only in there one time, but I can tell you exactly when it was. It was a Monday night, January 7th, 1980. And I was there with 2 guys from the area named Paul Rushlaw and Jeff Saunders. And we made plans earlier that summer to go because I said, guys, the WHA is merging with the NHL, and 4 teams are coming in, including Edmonton, and they got the kid Wayne Gretzky. And they're playing Montreal on January 7th, so why don't we go? And we got tickets at the start of the year, and we went down. And we always went early when we went in Montreal. I mean, this was one of the few times at that time that I didn't take a bus. And we actually took a car down in 1980, the 3 of us. And we went down, early, and we had dinner. We had our supper, as I often and almost always did when I went down early, at the Texan restaurant beside the Montreal Forum. And we had some beers there. And we're going to have some more beers. So we said, okay, well, I got the pints at the Texan restaurant. So Paul said he'd get the pints at the next place. So we said, well, where are we going to go? I said, let's go to Toll Blake's Tavern. It's right down the road. Guy and St. Catherine. And the Forum was the Texan was right beside the Forum, which was St. Catherine and Atwater. And so we walked down and we went in Toll Blake's Tavern. And I was wearing my old Montreal Canadian sweater that had silk screened on the back, hockey trivia expert. And so we went in to Toll Blake's Tavern. I said, don't worry, guys. I'll get us some free drinks. And I took my jacket off and I just walked around a little bit. And within a few minutes, guys at the table calling me over, older fellows, of course. I was 20 at the time, turned 21 that May. And so I'm 20 years old. Paul's 20 years old, and Jeff is like 18 years old. So I walk around, guys call me over, they drill me with a few hockey questions. I answered them. They buy us a few quarts. And Toll was there, and he was walking by, and I guess these group of regulars called him over, and they said, hey, Toll, this guy knows more about your career than you do. And he came over, he just looked me up and down. I was 20 years old. I looked like I was 15. And he said, so we have a little conversation for a few seconds. And I said, Mr. Blake, can I ask you a question? And he said, sure, son. And I said, was it more fun playing with the Rocket or coaching them? What was better? And he kind of looked at me and said, wow, it's kind of a neat question, son. Kind of a neat question. He said, I'll tell you what. I found I could control him better on the ice. So, what a great answer. And boom, just like that, he was gone. He was gone. And I never saw him again. Other than from a distance a couple times at the Forum in the 80s before I guess he stopped going, because I had a press pass a few times, but I never talked to him again. And he died in 1995, I believe it was, from Alzheimer's. And what a man, what a career. And he'll be my toast in just a minute's time. Those are my 2 dates on hockey tonight. As I said, a couple of other things on numbers, starting with Ray Ferraro talking today about number 18 for the Montreal Canadiens. And, a lot of anomalies with numbers as well. And the interesting thing is Serge Savard left the Habs to play 2 years in Winnipeg. And a number of players, which was often the case, would wear players' numbers until those numbers were officially retired by the team. So the Canadiens were no exception to that. And number 18, and I don't know if I'll get everybody right now, but Jeff Brubaker was the first guy to wear 18, and then Bill Root wore 18, and you had Denny Savard wore number 18, probably most famously. Same name, got his name on the Stanley Cup in 1993. Valerie Bure was the last guy to wear 18. Tom Curvers wore number 18. Matthew Schneider wore number 18 for the Montreal Canadiens. You want to hear some other ones. The last guy to wear number 12, most of you know my favorite player of all time is Yvan Cournoyer. His number, of course, is retired on the Montreal Canadiens. 12 is retired for both Yvan and Dickie Moore. You know who was the last Montreal Canadian to wear 12 before it was retired for Yvan? I guarantee you not one of you know. It was Darcy Tucker. Darcy Tucker was the last guy to wear 12. So there wasn't any type of esteemed sort of hands-off approach to a lot of these numbers. If you left the Habs, in some instances, nobody was going to wear it right after. Like Rockets was retired right away. Beliveau was retired right away. But for those that wasn't, a number of players would wear it, and until they were obviously retired. So that's how that went. And as I said to one guy on Twitter today, well, you want to talk about an uproar. Ask Bruin fans who were around in the 70s and 80s when they gave number 7 to Sean Shanahan at one time. And this was before, obviously, he was retired for Phil Esposito. And even though he'd been traded to the Rangers, there was a massive uproar about that. And the other mistake that certain members of the Bruins staff made in the early 80s was when Guy Lapointe ended up as a member of the Boston Bruins, they gave him number 5, thinking that who's going to care now? Dick Clapper played a million years ago. But the outpouring of angst and absolute just anger was enough for Lapointe had to lose that number, had to remove it immediately. And he's told me the story, how bad he felt. He said he had no idea, or he never would have worn it. But anyway, just some quirks about players' numbers to add into this day in hockey today, even though not related to the date. And the last one today, as mentioned, I blocked a guy on Twitter today, and I feel bad about it. I mean, if you turn the clock back a few years, I would have gone back and forth, and we would have pissed in each other's ear and each other's cornflakes, and inevitably probably descended into some sort of childish name calling or insults. And I just didn't feel like putting up with today. And I blocked him after a couple of tweets. And so they asked for this list to name your top 5 Canadian athletes. And I went with Lionel Conacher, Gordie Howe, George Chuvalo, Clara Hughes, and Bobby Orr. So 4 of mine had a hockey connection anyway. And there's a number of other names that certainly could go in there. But I didn't pick Wayne Gretzky. And this was his bone of contention, as it was another lad's just recently before I started taping this. So we'll see how he responds and if I'm going to have to inevitably block him as well. And I hope not. You know, you could just say cheers and agree to disagree. Or here's the easiest thing to do. Here's a real novel concept. Make your own list. How about that? Make your own list. When I think of athleticism, I don't think of Wayne. When I think of Wayne, I think of his vision on the ice. When he took the strength and conditioning strength and conditioning for the Oilers every year at the start of the season, he finished dead last every year. Wayne Gretzky was not necessarily athletic per se, even though he's a decent lacrosse player and I think a pretty good hardball player. And he's one of the greatest hockey players of all time, maybe the greatest. But I think of his vision, his passing, his intellect, his hockey on the ice, what he did, cutting to the center. Nobody had done it before. Really, no one's been able to do it with any degree of regularity since. What he did setting up behind the net, that didn't require athleticism per se, so I didn't have him in my list of top 5. And I know putting George Chuvalo as a name nobody would put. And I know that. But I've said for years, I've said it privately and I said it publicly, that to me, he's one of the greatest Canadians of all time. Let alone one of the greatest Canadian athletes. He was a Canadian champion heavyweight boxer for 27 years. He was ranked number 3 in the world, the highest he ever made. He was in the fight of the year with Floyd Patterson in 1965, and he won a total of 27 rounds with Muhammad Ali, including taking that first fight in 66 on 2 weeks' notice. 2 weeks' notice, and he went the distance with then Cassius Clay. And then he went again the distance in Vancouver in 1972 with Muhammad Ali. To me, he is definitely, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Not only that, never knocked off his feet. Never once has an amateur or a pro knocked down. And you don't think that's a fantastic athletic accomplishment? What's needed athletically in boxing? To me, you can make the case he's the greatest Canadian athlete of all time. I went with Lionel Conacher because he excelled at everything he touched. Lionel Conacher won an Allen Cup, a Memorial Cup, a Stanley Cup, a Grey Cup. May not have won an Allen Cup. I may be wrong on that one. But he could box, he could play lacrosse, he was a fastball player, a football player, a hockey player. He was voted Canada's Athlete of the Half Century, and the award is named after him. If you don't have him on the list, I think that's wrong. I don't think it's a huge mistake not to have Wayne. I think it's a huge mistake not to have Lionel Conacher and George Chuvalo. And Gordie Howe, to me, from a hockey perspective, is the greatest all-around athlete to ever wear skates. Is he my number 1 pick for hockey? No. But that's why I got Bobby Orr on the list as well. Wayne would be up there, but I didn't have him in the top 5. So make your own damn list. It's pretty easy, right? There you have it. Holy lifting. Bunch of babies, I'll tell you. What am I going to do? I'm going to have a drink. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to toast Toe Blake tonight. Pour myself a healthy shot of whiskey. And please feel free to join me. If you got anybody you'd like me to toast, let me know. It'd be an honor to do so. Truly would. Tonight, because I met him, on Monday night, January 7th, 1980, and he's such a special man in the sport of hockey and was involved in the game for so long, not just as a player. I'm toasting the late, great Hector Toe Blake. G'day.